Welcome to our webinar organized by the IMD World Competitiveness Center to mark the launch of the 2020 World Talent Ranking. I'm very pleased to see you all joining our webinar today, and I'm also very honored to count with the amazing list of panelists for our conversation today. As you know, the IMD World Competitiveness Center started operating more than 30 years ago, and our objective has been to promote the competitiveness of nations and to help governments with the right policies, making people's life better off. And we have always claimed that in order for a country to be competitive, there are several pillars, but the two most important in these current times are digital technologies and talent management. We released our digital competitiveness ranking already 2 months ago, and today we're launching our talent competitiveness ranking, which we published already 5 years ago with the intention of helping governments, but also the private sector, to understand the forces behind behind talent competitiveness. That's our objective today. We want to have a broader discussion about talent, not only about the rankings, and hopefully you are going to find this panel interesting. Just remember that in order for you to participate, you have two ways. One is throughout the Q&A function in Zoom, or directly through the chat. I will be managing the questions. You can actually feed me with questions throughout the entire webinar, but my plan is to have probably a 20-minute to half an hour original presentation by our speakers, and we want to devote as much time as possible to having a discussion. So make sure that you, in the Q&A, you identify yourself, where you come from specifically, and then I will pass the questions on to our speakers. Let me start by introducing them briefly. Our first speaker today is Bettina Schaller, who is the head of Group Public Affairs at the ADECO Group currently. As well, I would mention a board member of the World Employment Confederation. Bettina, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, good day, Arturo. Thank you so much for having me. I'm well. There's no place I'd rather be than here right now. So thank you so much for this invitation, and hello to everybody on this webinar. Listen, yes, with the ADECO Group, indeed, the world's leading provider of HR solutions. And let me actually start with the skilling part, which is a big part of what we do. But very important these days, we're supporting businesses and governments on the whole transitioning questions in the labor market. And then, of course, there's the recruitment side and there's the actual staffing side. We're present in 60 countries around the world, and therefore always very interested in all types of rankings like this one. Now, besides my role for the ADECO Group, indeed, I'm active in that broader landscape of the institutions of the world of work. You mentioned World Employment Confederation. I have the pleasure of being the global president of this association. I'm also involved in the G20 Employment Task Force, and I sit on the Business at OECD Employment, Labor and Social Affairs Committee, also as the vice president. So you see, involved in this world of work, and therefore tremendously looking forward to be part of this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. I know Sertak Yeltekin for already a few years, originally since his different roles in talent development in several companies. And I'm very pleased that he's joining us today as well. Sertak is based in Singapore, and he's the founder and managing director of Singforce Ventures, and I must mention as well, an executive in residence in our Singapore campus. Sertak, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Arturo. Very well. I'm really pleased to be here with all of you, especially with Bettina and Jason, and it's a great pleasure. Yes, I am in Singapore right now. I've been here for about 3 years. Before that, almost 20 years in Europe, mostly in the corporate world. But over the last couple of years, I have been actively involved in impact investing and social finance advisory. I manage funds. I'm an investor myself. I do venture building, and so especially education and talents and the role of talents within the broader spectrum of the social context is an very interesting argument for me, and this is something that really makes a big difference in the company's development, in society's development, in communities development. So I'm really very pleased to be here to contribute to this lounge. Thank you.
Thank you, Serta. You know, for a European, having met a politician such as Jason has been refreshing. We met a few years ago, but he's extremely energetic, young, obviously, as you can see, and very driven. And I was very pleased that he agreed to join us as well today. Jason Shu is until very recently member of the Taiwanese parliament, very much involved and engaged with issues related to digital transformation, a big advocate for technologies and particularly blockchain, and also with several corporate roles, for example, a founding chairman of FutureX. I want to have a discussion with Jason about technology and especially with Taiwan, about Taiwan. So Jason, good afternoon for you as well. How are you?
Very well. Thank you very much, Arturo. It's great to be here with the distinguished panelists. And as shared by Arturo, for the past 4 years, I was a member of parliament in Taiwan, focusing on technology policy, education, innovation, digital transformation, and working closely with various ministers to steer Taiwan throughout this COVID pandemic period through digitalization and as well as digital transformation. And one of the highlights of my legislative career is to form a World Competitiveness Alliance with the IMD. And actually, I brought Arturo to speak at a parliament in front of legislators of different parties. And I think that really brought attention to the parliament as a whole to really take note of the issue of cultivating the talent for the future. And we looked at talent as a national issue. It's something for a small place like Taiwan that we really put a lot of value and in cultivating and in investing talent. And we look at also talent circulation is one of the nation's most important priorities. And also because of the COVID and pandemic, Taiwan has done exceptionally well with only a few hundred confirmed cases. And now we come up with this program called Gold Card program. And it's a visa program to allow talented professionals to come to Taiwan to set up companies, to start businesses, and etc. So I will go deeper into that during the panel, but I just wanted to take one more minute to share my current position. I'm now the Secretary General of Mang Jie Science and Technology Association. It's Taiwan's largest technology association with board members such as Foxconn, TSMC, Acer, and some of the world's most famous ICT companies. And we are working and thinking jointly how to solve these talent crisis issues. So I think that might be something I can contribute as we progress during this panel. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So my first question is for Bettina, because I know that you, Bettina, and especially within the ADECO group, you have been doing a lot of work on the future of jobs and pay. And obviously this is something that we tackle in our rankings, and then we see that in certain countries, while the education systems are good enough, then companies fail to provide employees with the skills that they need. And especially in the context of a massive change in the type and the characteristic of jobs that we're going to see in the future, how do you think that companies and then governments can tackle these issues for the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the questions out there right now, isn't it, Arturo? And actually, let me maybe first make a preliminary remark of why rankings like this one are so important from a company perspective, because obviously companies are looking at which countries have the appropriate frameworks for talent to develop. And Jason, you mentioned this ecosystem approach, where the government, but then also companies and other players, and very importantly, technology and innovation are involved. So this more and more becomes an absolute prerequisite for companies as well. Now, look, I mean, one of the things we're seeing in the skills discussion right now, which is very interesting, is that actually many companies still don't have the full visibility of what their actual talent pool is and what skills that talent pool has. So we like to start, at the very basics, which is around, listen, you need to, make a full assessment of what you have around, and then also think about the approach you have to that talent pool in a forward-looking way. Obviously, matching it to your strategy, that is one thing, but then also thinking about, the crisis was one thing, but thinking about what you're going to need going forward. And therefore, that assessment piece is actually quite vital. We take it for granted, but there's still not enough businesses that actually make that step and then invest. Then on the skills side, once you've made your assessment, I don't know any business and company these days that's going to say, okay, we have it all, Then obviously go ahead, think about where you need to mainly fill the gaps. That seems quite obvious as well. But there, one important element that we've been saying is focus on not replacing, but on renewing your workforce. There is actually our colleagues within the Adecco group of LHH who are specialized in what we call the ROI being the return on individuals. And this is where the skills topic comes in very importantly, because too many businesses might still think about, oh, I don't have the skills in-house, so let me go and, buy or borrow in a way. But what we're saying is, sure, that might still be an option, but think about upskilling, reskilling your own people. Nothing new, but I can confirm here that this is what we're still seeing. Now, one of the elements, of course, that is linked to this up and reskilling is the finance. Who's going to pay for it? And we've got very diverse ways around the world where, again, either the government or the framework is geared towards instruments that will help in that financing. For us at the Adecco Group, we know that this is one of the key issues to tackle. You cannot ask companies to up and reskill if you don't have a solution there, because not all employers, not all businesses and organizations will actually have those financing mechanisms. Even though, and this is here what we see, all our studies are showing that it's actually financially more viable, as I just said, to re and upskill than to actually let somebody go and have all the costs around the recruitment of that new person. So the re and upskilling is a good thinking anyway. Now, I'd just like to mention one instrument that we particularly are advocating for at the Adecco Group these days, which is the individual learning accounts. And of course, we know that a country like Singapore has looked at that already. So it's really giving each and every individual access to an account, as the word says, where she or he can, along the life path, along the career, fall back, tap into those funds and that money in order to use it for re and upskilling. And this is important for us, as I said, when it comes back to where should that financing be? Should it be the employer? Well, we think that with something like the individual learning account, you can actually redistribute there and also empower the individual himself and herself. To summarize, the last thing I'd love to share here when we talk about skills and what needs to be done now, we really also want to stress that now is the time more than ever to think about taking in young people as well, and just to consider the wealth of skills also from a perspective of innovation that young people bring to any business and to any organization. So when we talk to our clients and our partners, we encourage them to use the full spectrum of talent out there. Again, look at your existing one, make sure you've got the right skills assessment, and upskill. Bring in new talent, of course, but when you bring in that new talent, make sure you bring in young people, make sure you have apprenticeship contracts, you have internship contracts, so use that full spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting, because it also suggests from the policy perspective that obviously governments need to support that process. That is, education is not enough. It's not enough to put graduates, at the door of companies, so they will perform well.
Absolutely. No, more and more that work needs to be done hand in hand. And as you can imagine, we're intersection between the world of work and the world of education. And we see those countries that have the models where that intersection, is functions well, they have the most efficient labor markets and they are the most competitive. So for us, this really goes hand in hand. You need that link between education, between skilling and the labor market needs. And then you will be able to flourish and you will be able to continue to attract as well, which is important in this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So on a similar front, something that we have analyzed in our ranking this year profusely is this issue of mobility of talent. And I want to ask Sertak about that, because for once we always thought that talent attraction is key for a country, and it combines very well with the education system. But I see two forces at play in the COVID-19 world. One is for talent to be mobile anyway, because we can work from home, and then I don't need to be in Switzerland to work for a Swiss company. But at the same time, there are more barriers to movement across countries, and I don't know where it is going. So that's why, Sertak, given your experience, how do you see that talent mobility is going to evolve in the near future?
Well, I think talent mobility is absolutely going to be one key issue, not in terms of physical mobility, but how do you actually tap into talent in places that are not in geographical proximity to you. And I think this is the biggest novelty after COVID-19. We're already seeing it happen. It was happening over the last couple of years. For example, people would go out to Estonia or Bahamas or Barbados to establish their companies and work from there, especially within the gig economy. The gig economy, it was a rather quite utilized method. You could stay in one place and then you would actually work in another location. So this was already happening, but it was sort of like an anomaly. Everybody was looking at it as if this is not going to touch me. This is not going to touch my environment. This is not going to touch my country. Well, you know what? After COVID-19 and what happened over the course of this last year, I think any barrier to remote working has come down tremendously. Right now, remote working is the norm. Actually, physical presence is the anti-norm. So you basically could work any place and from a distance. Now, this is going to have huge repercussions, of course. I mean, in terms of the way the labor unions are organized, the way the labor is organized, the way the country legislation is organized. How much money do you pay to people who are actually in a jurisdiction where cost of living costs much less? This will be a clear, I think, area that a lot of corporations and a lot of governments will struggle to find a clear solution. But if you purely look at it from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's an incredible opportunity. I mean, you don't have to actually build up huge labor forces in certain places. Of course, it really depends on the activity. If there's a labor component that you need to have proximity of, you need to build a team. But if you are actually in the services business, you're in the professional services business, you're in IT services or any type of services that can be done from a distance, and I'm talking about almost 80% of stuff can be done from a distance, then you're going to have people sitting in one place and working for another place. Now, this is revolutionary. And for example, a person like myself, I mean, I spend a big chunk of my professional life in continental Europe, in Italy and elsewhere, where for 20 years we discussed about mobility. We could not even take one person from one building and put it in another building because everybody would start yelling, saying, you know, you need to respect certain laws, regulations, and this and that. I remember doing a digital transformation of the learning environment. It took 3 years to convince HR and all the other colleagues that we had to go digital. And I remember doing, you know, at the time with IMD, that IMD was launching its digital programs. And I said, I'm going to offer myself and my team as the sort of guinea pig for this program, pioneers for this program, because I think this is really going to work. And it did. And now everybody looks back and says, oh, well, we should have done it 3-4 years ago. Well, you know, I think change is everywhere, and you can resist change, but you cannot actually overcome change. Change will take you to places that you would not even imagine. And I think this is what's happening right now in terms of workforce, in terms of talents, in terms of, you know, workspace and live space or living space. All of this all bundled up. It's very hard to distinguish between any of these spaces any longer. Now, this is a huge challenge, of course. I mean, in terms of policymaking, it's going to be a huge challenge. It's going to be, I work with a lot of social enterprises in South and Southeast Asia, trying to, you know, make sure that they have the right people to do what they need to do. They have the right funding. They work on really thin margins. But the fact that actually they can even get a lot of services from a distance and pooled services and not rely on, you know, the costs that are generated by their own environment is a huge, huge effect on their, you know, bottom line and on their margins. So we're going to see this phenomenon almost in all aspects of life, policy making, corporations, individuals' adjustment to this new work environment, and mobility as in physically moving is going to be replaced by almost virtual mobility. Okay, so the concept of mobility is going to change, so this is a, you know, new world, and we just have to get used to it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's definitely the case. Hopefully, you know, hopefully in our ranking, you know, and in our study of talent, we capture all of these changes. So there are many. One of them being technology, and that's why I want to ask Jason. So Jason, Taiwan is one of the countries in our rankings that always excels in several aspects of talent management, but in particular of the quality of the digital talent of the working force. So given that you also come from a combination of public and policy and private sector experience, what do you think are the key success factors of Taiwan in managing its digital talent and its education system? And specifically, what could be the advice that you would give to other countries?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most important factors to be considered at this point in time is the COVID pandemic. Pandemic has been a game changer, particularly in the way we conduct education and receive education. And going forward, we might view everything in a different lens, with which the skills that we teach and the lessons that we provide to students and the techniques that we're going to equip with the future workforce may drastically different than the way we did 20 or 30 years ago. Now we are entering into a very different era. It's an era that mobility is very important. And it's an era that the ability to deal with complexity, the ability to deal with isolation, the ability to deal with digital work is very important. So Taiwan obviously has been an important player in global ICT sector, information and computing technology. But we are now moving into a further fluid and dynamic economy where digital transformation is deciding factor whether or not your businesses, enterprises, or organizations can survive in the years to come. If this pandemic were to become a norm, or it is going to stay, which it will, which means that we have to change everything from the bottom up. This goes from your social political system, this goes from your education system, your tax system, how you deal with technology disruption and its potential impact on the job market, and what governments should be doing in equip their workforce to deal with this type of change. And how do we equip our workforce to deal with mental isolation? And all of us are conducting this forum in a remote way. We can't see each other in person, but how do we ensure that the interaction is still real, that even for the teenagers who are growing up and experiencing this and having to deal with the future challenges in a way that adults like us or people who have succeeded in before never have to deal with. So this type of complexity, I think, really play into an important factor that today the world is begging for governments and policymakers and leaders to rethink everything from education to technology to economic policy in how you distribute resources. And so it's important that we try to figure that out. And Taiwan is lucky in a way that we detect this COVID pandemic early on. So we closed the border and we somehow managed the situation quite ably. We only have about 500 confirmed cases so far. But still, if the world doesn't get better, if the world doesn't, stand up to the future challenges, it means that we all go down together. And so it's important that we see this as a holistic problem. And I think to equip your citizen with the basic digital skills and to ask your enterprises to be able to think about the future and then to provide programs for your workforce to upskill and then to learn about new skills. I think it's very important. But most importantly, government must figure out a way to think about how this pandemic will eventually change everything. And if we resist the change, that means that we are waiting to be disrupted. And I think it's important that we figure that out and then make the change together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I don't know if you any of you have anything to say about the others or any comment before I pass on to the next question, because you have made very interesting contributions in 3 different aspects of talent management.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to, I think both Jason and Bettina mentioned the fact that it's not enough at individual or at corporate level to have an upskilling initiative or campaign or determination to actually upskill the workforce. You need a policy at government level, at state level, at country level that would actually support this type of transition. And I think this is more crucial right now than ever. Over the course of the last 7-8 years, I think a lot of learnings responsibility was pushed onto corporations and individuals. we would go around, especially to tell people, you're an individual, you should take care of yourself, you have to learn and you have to upskill yourself. You are, in charge of your own destiny, which is fantastic on a sort of a nice recommendation level. But the reality was completely different. People were not equipped. They did not have access to finance. They did not have access to resources. There wasn't a policy framework that would support them in terms of upskilling. Likewise, corporations also, in many cases, especially the larger corporations, proactively started to invest quite a bit of money, especially in certain areas where there was a big upskilling necessity, such as digital transformation, which was all perfectly fine, but that would not add up to a countrywide policy. That would never replace a countrywide policy. So what you really need a much more active involvement of policymakers in this arena. And I see that, for example, just you were mentioning the Singapore case. It is a smaller country, so you cannot maybe compare it with the larger countries, and you would be comparing apples and oranges. But when you look at some of the elements that you can actually take and put into other places, I think one element is that there is a statewide policy where supports people, and then the individual decision is you build your own curriculum by having access to a number of learning or development items, and you would also get financing for that. And there's a whole ecosystem built around it. I think this is the type of activity that needs to be done. You just cannot leave it only to individuals and corporations. Governments have to step in. I think this is my learning.
Yeah. Absolutely, Sevdak and Arturo, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I actually wanted here to draw the attention to what's happening in Brussels just this week, where the European Commission launched the European Pact for Skills. Now, this is something which had been in the pipeline already before the crisis. Because of the necessity of it, it's something that the previous commission was already looking at, but now the new commission that's been in place since December last year, under the current commissioner, Nicolas Schmit, he said from the beginning, in this world of employment, but it's actually cross-sectoral, this is one of the key initiatives. And now this week, the Commission launched that European Pact for Skills. It happens to be part of the European week of vocational educational training, so a very interesting one as well. And if you go look for that, you will find that there's many companies, the Adecco Group being one of them, that are there committing. But you're right, it's this ecosystem between the government needs to put in the framework, and here we have a supranational entity now that is, giving a framework for the EU member states. Very interesting, and I'm sure a few years down the road we will be seeing the fruits also of this coordinated approach to some extent where it's possible. So that framework, and then of course, yes, the businesses are there. Still the big multinationals mainly, but we also see, and importantly, small and medium enterprises, that are picking up all the good practices that they see thanks to initiatives like this one.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I think a question that I can add to all this discussion is, especially for our audience, if you have to choose a role model of talent management as a country, probably. I know that you will choose Switzerland and Singapore and Taiwan, but why not? But what would you say? So, what would you think would be the key reason why this country is so successful in talent management? And given that we have a particular methodology, I would like to know your opinion also about how do you assess a country in its ability to manage its talent?
Should I take it straight away?
Yes.
Well, Arturo, you're right. I would go with Switzerland first. And in full objectivity, not only because I'm based in Zurich and I'm a Swiss by passport. I grew up as an expat outside of the country, but it's this view from outside now being back in Switzerland, which makes me very comfortable with that. To me, there's that interlinkage, I mentioned it, between the world of work and the world of education. I have seldom seen another country where that has been over the years culturally, fomented and really developed so well. Now, Sertak, you said it, you cannot, it's a small country as well, so, can you compare it? I think the merit of Switzerland is that you can see it works. There's actually three more elements for me. The other element why Switzerland is there's so much offering in how to acquire skills, at all levels and all types. And there is a permeability, how they say, between once you've acquired one degree of certification or skill, you're not stuck there, but you can continue and you can also go cross industry. This is absolutely key and will be, the number one going forward as well, this ability of transitions, Third point, most education is for free. It's for free, at least the important one. And if you compare that to other countries where, people have huge debts, college debts in the United States or elsewhere, this is not to be underestimated. It brings us back to the argument of finance that I mentioned earlier. And then lastly, one piece that I also always say is teachers are actually recognized in this country. So those who provide the skills have a high standing in society and are seen as really these conveyors of knowledge, and they have the recognition, which in many other countries is not the case. Mm-hmm. But Arturo, I actually, right now, from my perspective, I'm looking with incredible interest at Finland, what policies Finland has been putting into place. I mean, they say officially education is a cornerstone of the Finnish welfare society. And I invite everybody to go look at what that looks like. Super interesting, skills for them is more about also well-being and, feeling good about yourself, etc. And there's a completely different approach to certifications. And also in Finland, similar to Switzerland to a certain extent, it starts with primary, goes then to universities, and there's a concept of lifelong learning already in the Finnish environment as well. Last one that I'm looking at with great interest, because I'm also involved actually in the World Economic Forum activities, and the WEF, of course, launched their Reskilling Revolution initiative. Well, there's one country, which is the UAE. That Minister of Education and Employment is incredibly innovative, and he's almost ready to take, a clear slate and to start now building, looking at all of those best practices. So, I'm inviting myself maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years down the road, and for us to look at those countries and see where they are.
And I'm pleased to actually confirm that the 3 countries that you have mentioned rank very high in the 2020.
There you go. There you go.
Thank you. Jason, so we talked about digital talent earlier, but in the case of Taiwan, what would you highlight? Or maybe other country, but particularly in the case of Taiwan, what would you highlight as your main, I think, contribution to the world of talent?
Yeah, so I would look at countries in terms of what they do during this period in changing the way that education is being operated. And I think that countries, particularly smaller countries that have the edge to move faster, and particularly I think Bettina mentioned Switzerland, obviously has always been an innovative symbol in Europe, and Scandinavian countries that are also very agile, and I think they put skills first. I think in most Asian countries, I think it's because of the cultural association that a lot of people put grades before skills. So that's something that we need to get rid of or to change society as a society in general. But I think what countries in this region, particularly Singapore, Taiwan, can offer is that we are sort of the launch pad into Asia. And I think Asia going forward still would be the world's fastest uh, growing population region, and as well as the most competitive economy region. And we would be very interested in looking at countries such as Singapore or Vietnam or Philippines or Thailand that has a very young population. Their average age could be only 29 or 30 years old, and with almost 100 million people population, in what they are doing, empowering their workforce, in their human capital. And Taiwan obviously has a role to play in this because of our position in global supply chain. And by doing so, I think we do have a lot of areas that we can offer in working with more European countries and as well as other partners around the world. So that's something that I would say is very, very interesting in watching, particularly in this period of time. Everyone, while is trying to coping with pandemic, but I think it's also important to look at what can we do to basically revolutionize the education and really upskill the future workforce.
Thank you. I guess that Jason has thrown the ball to you, speaking about countries like Singapore or small countries. You want to emphasize the advantages of Singapore or any other country? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's an expression that I really like, and I think this is the distinction between countries that actually are able to cultivate talent, attract talent, and those who don't cultivate and not attract talent, is the expression that talent is equally distributed, but opportunities are not. Now, opportunity is what makes actually talent management successful in a country. I tend to disagree with the fact that it's purely about the educational system. I think overall educational system, almost every part of the world, is essentially about content. And the content is basically they drill a hole in your brain, pour a lot of content, it sort of goes down, they pour a little bit more. But essentially 90% of education systems around the world, except those who are, lucky to have the financial means to have access to alternative methods, they pretty much go through the same types of education, more or less. But what is different is the opportunities. And I think what makes a difference between Singapore, places like Taiwan or Switzerland, or looking at Finland or any other country, is that the number of opportunities it creates for the talent to flourish, to self-realize, to grow, whether it's the finances that they put into act or integration between business world and the education world. For example, I've hired over the last 3 months 5 interns that I work with. They're all university students. These guys work, almost all of the university students work between 15% to 100% almost throughout their university career, depending on peaks of exams and stuff. And corporations, even small firms like myself, we're all encouraged to actually bring on board all these young people who come and learn, and you mentor them, and that is the opportunity. Because that's not what I'm seeing. For example, I'm Turkish by origin. I spent most of my adult life in Italy. Both countries rank extremely low in the ranking, And if you look at Turkey, I think it's one of the bottom. And it's a wonderful, if you go to Turkey, it's a wonderful group of talents there, but the opportunities do not exist. Likewise, Italy, amazing talent, and a lot of Italian young people, including my kids, they go abroad because there are no talent, there are no opportunities within the country. Now, if opportunities are not created because of labor inflexibility, because of laws, because of regulation, because of culture, there are just many factors, then you're not going to see talent flourish. And that is the biggest difference between a place like Singapore and and maybe Finland or Switzerland, and the countries that are actually ranking really low, because they have wonderful people, but they don't have access to opportunities.
Yeah, perhaps I could also.
So I just need to say it's so important. That's why I said earlier, companies go and hire young people. Do it.
Yeah.
Do it. That's the opportunity, Pete.
Jason?
Fully aligned with you. Sorry,
Perhaps
Jason.
I could. No problem. Perhaps I can add to that what the Certec was saying. So I mentioned that we have come up with this program called Gold Visa. It's essentially a one-way, one-stop service for talent to come and stay in Taiwan for extensive period of time during this COVID period, and it's an easy way to help professionals to set up companies and also offer some tax breaks and then things like that. Talents go where the opportunities are. So I think it's important to know where, and I think countries make it easy will be competitive.
But one, so, and I'm moving actually naturally to the question from our audience, because there are two questions in the Q&A section of Zoom, and by the way, I invite the audience to ask any other question by Renee and Joan that are closely related. So today in the COVID-19 world, actually companies can hire anywhere, and actually I can hire in a Swiss company. I can have access to the best talent, to a person that has been educated in the best university in the world, that decides to live in the country with the lowest possible taxes or the highest quality of life, and then he or she can work for me. So what do you think that countries, so this is Renee, for example, how do you see that governments can become more agile in respect to taxes, for example, for cross-jurisdiction employees and talents? And in the case of Joan, he says, since working from anywhere is becoming more accepted, we should have a different type of taxation rule because we have other barriers. How do you see governments adapting to this new border-free labor market?
Arturo, I'll take the first one. We don't.
Mm-hmm.
We don't. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. And actually, let's be honest, the first thing we saw governments do in the crisis is to shut down the borders and keep people within, the territory and clamp down, at least on geographical mobility, right? So it's something that is on the agenda, but that is such a huge piece. Right now, I'm not seeing any, but this might be just a blind spot that I have completely on this one. But for sure, that's going to be one of the topics that the international community will have to pick up now, more than ever.
Yeah. Certec or Jason, how do you see that? Certec.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that nobody is prepared right now. But the fact that they're not prepared is that. First of all, it just happened very quickly, and nobody had ever thought about this at all. I mean, it wasn't the norm. It was basically for certain types of work, such as IT or some services, you would actually recruit people from abroad in their location and make them do the work. But it was never a big preoccupation that this would actually touch all of the services within a company. And now that English has become sort of a language of communication around the world, you can go anywhere in the world and you can find people who can actually do the same work, especially for, I would say, 60-70% of the jobs in a corporate environment, they can be clearly outsourced in the sense that they're actually offshored. This is possible. So what we're going to see is that there's going to be a backlash, most probably in terms of, because governments depend on taxation. So if a country is actually having lower taxation and offering services from there into that country, you're going to see the countries, as Bettina was describing, close in and force corporations actually not to do this or declare this. And then you're going to push people to most probably, black labor type of arrangements where a lot of services will, in any case, will be provided. So instead of doing this, what you need to do, you have to have bilateral agreements with certain countries around labor taxation. For example, there are spots in the world where people, because of climate or because of nice environment, they tend to be happening. For example, if you go to north of Thailand, Chiang Mai, a lot of IT people are there. You go to Bali, there are quite a lot of people there. You go to other places where there's a huge young population in Estonia. Nowadays, Caribbeans are going to be a place of attraction. Now, instead of saying, I'm going to close my borders, what you have to say, yes, this phenomenon is here to stay, and I'm going to do bilateral or trilateral or multilateral agreements with all of these places so that I can harmonize taxation. So, but we're far away from that.
Yeah. And Jason?
Yeah, so perhaps use this opportunity to reorganize the way we work, and in a way that will reflect the future use of talent and the deployment of resources. I'll give an example. Right now in Silicon Valley, some of the major tech companies are now order their employees to work from home for good, forever. So what does that mean? What do these companies include? Google, Facebook, Twitter, and some of the startups companies in Silicon Valley. So what does that mean? What do they do with their office spaces? They are now leasing out their office buildings, turn them into community center, and making the otherwise stagnant office space originally designed for a structural use and regular use, and make them become flexible use for meetings and ad hoc meetings and things like that. So that would give government a different way of thinking about assets. So if all these companies start selling their offices, what should government do? And if everyone is now buying a laptop or buying an iPad or some sort of digital device to work from home, should governments think differently in reorganizing the way that government operates? And in a way that instead of having to go to some building for work, now trying to design a system, a communication system that allow your civil service to be conducted digitally. And this is the best timing for transformation. If we allow this timing to elapse, and if we just wait idly until the vaccine is invented and then being distributed, and we go back to life as normal, then it becomes a waste of time. So I would say, look at this time, and then try to figure out a way that's designed for the future, and once for all, develop programs that would allow a light use of the assets, and then try to design everything digitally.
Thank you. So, we have 7 minutes left, and there are many questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of you one question that summarizes many of the different issues that our participants are bringing. Let me start with you, Bettina. So there are a few questions regarding what happens in the workplace when it comes to, for example, skilled versus unskilled workers, or young versus old. For example, Babish is asking, so how do you see talents within an organization interacting and collaboration with those who are not as talented? I'm thinking, for example, when it comes to digital technologies, we know that in corporations there is a big divide between millennials, or the younger, and then the ones that have been educated in the old system, like myself. Is it going to create a cultural clash in organizations? Is it just about, because some of our audience are complaining about us talking about the young. What about the old? No, so how do you see that combining?
What about us, right? What about us?
Not
Look,
you, but
cultural clash, of course, and let's see, how should I do this? I mean, first of all, it actually depends on the culture of the company, and how ready that company is to facilitate the work between various generations and the skill. So that's something that you have to look case by case, and that you have to look, what should I say? Probably also country by country. No, but coming back to the company, I mean, the businesses we're working with, they are actively actually putting in place mechanisms where they will pull in, people from different generations, from different skill sets into projects. So it can be done, but it needs to be a specific effort. Now, if the question is more towards systemically, how can it be done? I mean, I have to go back to the apprenticeship system there, and to what we see in those countries that have that, because there automatically there is an exchange between generations, and therefore between skill sets, and there is a mindset from both or all the generations, not just young and old. We don't want to throw them into pots, but from all the generations, that every different person will bring something which is interesting and different to the conversation. So I'm a bit, high level here, but it has to do with that company culture. And at the end of the day, it goes back to also really walking the talk on, diverse and inclusive teams, where that diversity of skill sets is one of the elements of diversity. And we're building a culture where inclusion is the approach. So where really, all of those then have a voice is key as well. To me, it's part of the diversity and inclusion conversation.
Thank you. Jason, for you. So there is a question from Alessandro, particularly focused on mainland China and what has been happening recently with Ant Group and the government intervention in the IPO. At least that's how I read the question. But essentially, I think there is a key issue here that maybe governments intervene too much. Okay, something that we claim in the WCC, the center, is that there must be an optimal interaction between the government and the private sector. And in particular, in the case of technology, don't you see a danger that as we move much more cross-border, there is going to be too much intervention or regulation by governments in the digital arena, then leaving companies, a little bit of a constraint in what they can do?
Yeah, I certainly think so. And I think we are at a point in time where technology is affecting every fabric of our social and economic and political system. And look at the way that social media is invading our democracy and the political campaigns, and the surveillance is sort of being imposed on the civilians unwillingly. And all of these things, you can claim that, the big data, the AI, and everything is pointing to the future, the self-driving cars and, robots and everything like that. But I think what's important is that the government should be informed and should absorb the knowledge of the technology development and making it a important priority as part of the discussion when it comes to policy and legislation, and then try to figure out a way that the general public is the recipient of the technology development rather than a selected few who have the control over the technology development. That is certainly the case right now. If you look at the world is now being dominated by 5 or 10, mega tech companies, from Google, Facebook, Amazon, even, in China, Tencent, Baidu, and Alibaba. And the world is becoming less and less approachable in terms of actually having the real human impact. We are just connected by the sake of being connected, but not really having a real human connection. So I think it's important for government to be equipped with the knowledge of the technology disruption and having a solid policy discussions on the pros and cons of the technology.
Thank you. Sertan, last one is for you, and it's actually related to several questions that we have on remote work and working from home. You have been managing talent for multinational organizations in the past. So how do you tackle issues, for example, worker motivation, work-life balance, promotions in a world in which we're all working from home? So it is even difficult to assess the intangible side of talent beyond results. And this, I think, these are questions from our audience regarding remote working, which I think are going to be a challenge for the future.
Yes, I mean, the whole concept of work was based on chain of command, over the last 50 years. The last 5 years, we've seen quite a bit of disruption that was happening from technology and all that. But over the course of 5 decades, you had to sit right next to your boss, manager, in a closed space. You had a fixed sort of a time frame in which you worked. You did certain tasks at a certain pace. You would have annual appraisals. You would get promoted according to succession plans if the company is sophisticated. Otherwise, you would get promoted because somebody liked you, and likability usually happened as a factor, or you were really good. But you would move on. But this type of world has been sort of disrupted by the gig economy over the last couple of years, but by technology. But right now, this year, we're seeing a huge disruption. Remote work is difficult because with remote work, especially the manager's ability to manage people remotely diminishes extensively. So the concept of a manager managing a group of people is going to be disrupted. You can actually have, almost in many cases, self-governing teams that actually work on collaborative platforms, teams that govern themselves and learn then, about the way to tackle issues in the corporate environment by themselves. So we're going to see that. So there's going to be huge erosion of the role of the manager. And you could call it leader and you could call it whatever you want, but in any case, it's a dying animal. And this is what's going to happen, and you have to come to terms with it. The second thing is that you have to let go the chain of command. Many, especially young generation, Z generation, although my generation complains constantly about the young because, they're different. The reality is that the Z generation has totally different behaviors, totally different values. And I think there's fundamentally much based on collaboration and competition. We were all raised with a competitive spirit, not collaborative spirit. They're different. So I think that is also going to be in flux. The companies are going to face a difficult time with that. And I see a huge erosion also in the role of HR if it doesn't upgrade itself, because HR is going to be completely redundant in an environment like this. If it's only power broking, or you're going to see many other functions actually will be encyclopedically sort of, you'll come across them in Wikipedia as vestiges of a gone by era. So I think there is that change. You just have to embrace it and make sure that you listen to everything. I mean, one thing that I'm very, very concerned about, there are many people who get affected very adversely by remote. For example, women tend to work much more than men in the remote environment because they take
not only there.
Yeah, not only there. but I've seen the numbers. I've seen I work with a gender economics expert and see the numbers. Women have worked quite a few hours more than men. Over the course of the COVID disaster. And I think this is only going to, take place longer. You're going to see a lot of people who don't have access to internet, who don't have access to good Wi-Fi, who don't have access, they don't have a place to work, or their houses are crammed. If you go to places from India to Southeast Asia, many places that that you see, you cannot put 10 people in a room and make sure that they all do Zoom. So we need a totally different way of actually managing all of this. So
yeah, excellent. It's a good way to finish. So Jason, Sertak, Bettina, we are already 4 minutes past the hour. I think we have had a very loyal audience and several interesting questions, which I hope we have addressed. In any case, note for all of us, all of you that are out there, that the IMD World Competitiveness Center is releasing its World Talent Ranking as we speak. So you can consult the result for your country in our website. I hope that this discussion has been interesting as an amuse-bouche, as we say in the French part of Switzerland. And I hope that you'll have a fantastic day and a fantastic coming months despite all the troubles. Okay, so stay safe. Thank you very much for your participation.
thank you so much.
See you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arturo.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Hope to see you.